Emily Rivera moved quietly through the grand penthouse, balancing a silver tray of drinks in her hands. The lights above sparkled like stars, and soft classical music floated through the air. All around her were people dressed in suits and glittering gowns. They laughed loudly, held fancy glasses of wine, and spoke in voices full of confidence. It was the kind of place Emily never imagined herself working in, but here she was. She wore a simple black uniform, the kind that made you invisible. That was the point. Waiters weren't supposed to be seen or heard. They were there to serve, to smile, and to vanish quietly. Emily had gotten used to that. She didn't mind, really. It was just another job. She'd worked at coffee shops, cleaned houses, and even sold newspapers on the subway. This job was just one more shift, one more night to get through, one more paycheck closer to her dream. But tonight was different. The party was hosted by Richard Langston, a billionaire investor. Famous for his real estate empire and for throwing the most expensive parties in New York, people talked about his events, the way others talked about royal weddings or movie premieres. Everyone wanted to be invited. Politicians, actors, tech CEOs, and models all mingled together like they belonged on the same planet. Emily definitely didn't belong. She moved from one end of the room to the other, careful not to bump into anyone. Her shoes pinched her feet, and her hands were slightly numb from holding cold glasses for too long. But she kept her face calm and pleasant. That was part of the job, too. "More champagne?" she asked a man in a navy blue tuxedo. He waved her off without even looking at her. At another table, a woman in diamonds asked her if the oysters were fresh. Emily didn't know. They hadn't told her, but she smiled and said, "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." That seemed to make the woman happy. Emily had learned how to play the game. She glanced at the clock on the far wall. 2 more hours? That's when she heard the soft sound of a piano. Someone was playing a slow, elegant tune near the center of the room. She turned her head slightly and saw a grand white piano surrounded by guests. Sat on the bench, his hands moving effortlessly over the keys. People sipped wine and pretended to listen. Most of them weren't paying attention. Still, something inside Emily stirred. She hadn't touched a piano in almost 2 years. It's not since she left school. It's not since her mother got sick and everything changed. But the music kit brought memories rushing back. Of practice rooms and concerts, staying up late with headphones on, learning new pieces. Of applause, real applause, echoing through a hall that used to be her life. Now she served drinks to people who didn't even know her name. She took a deep breath and walked past the piano area, trying not to stare. Then, it happened. A tall man, clearly drunk, bumped into her tray. A glass of red wine wobbled, then spilled across his white shirt. The man gasped. Emily froze. Her heart dropped into her stomach. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. Grabbing a napkin, the man took the napkin but sneered at her. "What kind of waitress are you? These hands, what? Do you only know how to carry glasses?" Another guest laughed and said, "Maybe she's better at playing piano." The first man, half macking, half curious, looked at her and asked, "You know how to play?" Emily didn't want to answer. She didn't want the attention, but something in her face betrayed her. "A little," she said quietly, eyes down. That was enough. Across the room, Richard Langston had heard the exchange. He turned his head with interest. A smile crept onto his face. He loved surprises, and he loved showing off. This was the perfect mix of both. He stood up from his chair and said loudly, "Well then, let's hear it." The room went quiet. Conversations stopped. People turned. Emily blinked. "Excuse me, sir." "The piano," Richard said, gesturing toward it. "Let's see what you've got. A little entertainment from the staff." Some people chuckled. Others looked uncomfortable. A few guests raised their phones, ready to record what they expected to be a funny moment or maybe a disaster. Emily's face turned pale. "This couldn't be real. I really shouldn't," she began. "I insist," Richard said, his voice polite but firm. Emily looked around. Everyone was watching. Her manager gave her a nervous nod, clearly afraid to upset. The host, she walked slowly to the piano, each step heavy with fear. Her heart pounded. Her hands were cold. Her mind raced. What would she even play? What if she forgot everything? She sat down at the piano bench and stared at the keys. They were smooth and clean, just like she remembered. She let her fingers hover. Above them, she closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in deeply. Then she placed her hands down. Her first touch was soft. A single note rang out, then another. She started slow, tentative, like testing a memory. The room was so quiet, she could hear her own breathing. But she kept playing. Note by note, the music began to grow. She chose Claire de Lune without even thinking. It was the first piece she ever performed on stage as a teenager. It lived in her bones. Her fingers moved more confidently now, finding the rhythm, the emotion. The world around her began to disappear. There were no billionaires, no waitressing. Job, no spilled wine. Just the music. Just her. Across the room, people stood frozen. Even Richard Langston, who had expected something awkward or amusing, was stunned. His smirk faded into a quiet stare. The woman who had laughed earlier was now wide-eyed, her wine forgotten in her hand. Someone whispered, "She's amazing." The music swelled, filled with beauty and heartbreak, and something no one could name. It was more than talent, it was pain, hope, struggle, and love. All poured into the keys for those few minutes. Emily Rivera owned the room. And when the final note faded into silence, the silence stayed. No one clapped, not at first. They couldn't. They were too moved. It was as if they had all forgotten how to speak then. Slowly, applause began. First a few hands, then a wave of it, louder and louder, until the whole room was clapping, cheering, shouting. Emily looked up, confused. She stood quickly, backing. Away from the piano, suddenly aware of the crowd, people began asking, "Who is she? What was that? Where did she learn to play like that?" Someone recorded the whole thing. Someone else already had her name from her name tag, and Richard Langston. The man who forced her to play was now watching her with new eyes, not as a waitress, but as something else entirely. He didn't say a word. But everything had already changed. The sound of clapping still echoed in Emily's ears as she stepped away from the piano. She kept her head down, unsure what to do next. Her hands were slightly shaking, not from nerves anymore, but from the rush of emotion and disbelief. She had just played a full piece in front of a room full of powerful strangers, and they had applauded her like she was someone important. She had never expected this. She had only come to the party to earn her usual hourly pay, not to reveal something she had buried deep inside for almost 2 years. She quickly walked back toward the kitchen area, hoping to disappear from the spotlight. Other waiters looked at her with wide eyes, some smiling, some whispering things like that. "Was you? Or are you serious?" Emily just nodded shyly and tried to continue working, but things weren't the same anymore. Word was spreading fast across the party. People who had ignored her earlier now watched her when she walked by. Some smiled, some stared, and some clearly wanted to speak to her but didn't know how. Richard Langston was still near the piano, talking to a small group of guests. He seemed to be deep in conversation, but his eyes kept glancing toward where Emily had disappeared. There was a look on his face, curious, surprised, maybe even impressed. But there was also something else. Control. Richard was a man who didn't like being caught off guard. 15 minutes later, Emily heard a voice behind her. "You?" the voice said calmly. She turned and saw Richard standing there alone. He wasn't smiling. "Come with me," he said. Emily hesitated. Her first instinct was to say no, but something about his tone didn't give her the chance. She followed him quietly through a side hallway and into a private study with glass walls and heavy bookshelves. He closed the door behind them. "Sit," he said, pointing to a leather chair. Emily sat slowly, unsure of what was happening. She felt like a student being called into the principal's office. "You didn't tell me you were a pianist," Richard said. "You didn't ask," Emily replied, a little more boldly than she meant to. He raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "So, where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. "I studied at Juilliard," she said. That caught his attention, really. "And now you're waiting tables?" "My mom got sick. I had to leave school. I couldn't afford tuition anymore. Richard was quiet for a few seconds. Tapped his fingers on the side of a glass of whiskey he had picked up on the way in. I thought you were just another waitress, he said slowly. I am, Emily answered. At least tonight. He looked at her again, this time longer. He was trying to figure her out, what kind of person she was, what she wanted, why someone with so much talent was in such a low position. You surprised me, he said finally. I wasn't expecting much when I told you to play. Didn't. Want to? Emily said honestly. You made me. True, he nodded. But you did. And now everyone's talking about you? I didn't ask for that. No, he said, leaning back in his chair. But you handled it well. You were impressive. Emily didn't know how to respond. Compliment from a man like Richard. Langston was rare. She could feel that he didn't give them often or easily. You play like someone who's been through things, he said. There's pain in your music. Emily nodded. There's been some... Richard stood up and walked to the window. The view from the penthouse stretched across all of Manhattan, glittering lights stretching far into the distance. This city eats people like you, he said suddenly. Talented, kind, quiet. You get swallowed up unless someone notices you. Not asking for special treatment, Emily said. No, he agreed. You're not. That's why I'm interested. Emily stayed silent. She had no idea what he meant by that. I host parties like this to network, he said, turning to her. To make connections, deals, alliances. But every now and then, something real shows up in the middle of all the noise. And tonight, that was me, she asked quietly. Yes, he said. There was another long pause. Emily didn't know what he wanted from her. Maybe he didn't know either. For a man who seemed to control everything in his world, he looked a little lost at that moment. You know, he said slowly, years ago, I met a kid playing violin in the subway. Gave him a scholarship. He's with the New York Philharmonic now. Emily blinked. That's amazing. Richard nodded. See talent, I don't always act on it, but when I do, I go all in. I'm not a charity case, Emily said. Her voice was soft, but there was strength behind it. Richard smiled slightly. I didn't say you were. He walked back to the door and opened it. You can go now, he said. God, but I'll be watching. Emily stood up, her head spinning. She left the room and went back to the main hall. The music had changed something more upbeat now, but people were still talking about her performance. A woman touched her arm and said, That was beautiful, the man asked. What's your name again? She just smiled politely and kept moving later that night, when the party finally ended, and she helped clean up the empty glasses and half-eaten desserts. Emily felt exhausted but alive. Something had shifted in her. Part of her that had been asleep had suddenly woken up. As she left the building and stepped into the cool night air, she looked up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't know what would come next. But she had played, and they had heard her. Emily stood at the corner of the street, her arms crossed against the soft chill of the night. She had just walked out of one of the richest buildings in New York City. But instead of feeling proud or confident, she felt like her legs might give out. Everything inside her was spinning her thoughts, her emotions, her memories. The image of the piano was still clear in her mind, the feel of the keys under her fingers, the sound of each note echoing in the silent room, the stairs, the stillness, the complete hush that fell over a room full of powerful people. For those few minutes it had felt like the world had stopped just to listen to her. She had never played for an audience like that before. Not at Juilliard, not in high school competitions, and definitely not while wearing a waitress uniform. In front of billionaires? But somehow it had happened, and now she couldn't stop thinking about it as she walked home through the quiet streets. She remembered the way the music had flowed out of her as if her fingers had a mind of their own. She had been afraid when she first sat down, terrified of making a mistake, of being laughed at. But the moment her hands touched the keys, it was like something inside her woke up. Something she thought was gone. When she reached her small apartment, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space was tiny, a single room with a small bed, a desk, a kitchen that barely fit a stove, and old floorboards that creaked. Her mother was already asleep on the bed, hooked up to a small oxygen machine. Emily walked over, checked her mother's breathing, adjusted the blanket, then quietly sat down at the desk. She opened her old laptop. The screen flickered, slow and faded from age. She wasn't expecting anything. She just wanted to distract herself. But when she opened her messages, her eyes widened. There were notifications. Dozens of them. Facebook, Instagram, email, even LinkedIn. She clicked on one, then another. Her eyes scanned the words. Was this you at the Langston party? You were incredible.
Where can we hear more?
Piano girl goes viral? Do you teach? You the pianist from the party? Confused, Emily opened a link someone had sent her. It was a video, a shaky, handheld phone video. It showed her sitting at the white grand piano, her head down, her hands moving over the keys. The camera zoomed in on her face and panned across the silent crowd. The caption read, "Waitress stuns elite NYC party with breathtaking piano performance." She stared at the screen, shocked. Someone had filmed her. Someone had shared it. And now people were watching by the time she refreshed the page. The video had thousands of views. People in the comments were saying things like, "She plays with her soul. How is she not famous? This is what raw talent looks like." Emily leaned back in her chair, heart racing. What was happening? The next morning, she was woken by a phone call. A strange number flashed on the screen. She almost ignored it, but picked up at the last second. "Hello," she said sleepily. "Hi, is this Emily Rivera?" "Yes. Who's this?" "This is Grace Thomas from the New York Times. We're working on a short piece about last night's Langston party and your performance at the piano. Could I ask you a few questions?" Emily sat up straight. Me? Well, your video has gone viral, and we've already received several requests asking who you are. Many people think you might be a Juilliard student." "I was," Emily said quietly, "but I dropped out." "That's actually the heart of the story," Grace said. "May I quote you on that?" Before Emily could answer, another call came in. She let the reporter go and answered the next one. "Hi, this is Mark Cooper with Classical Pulse Radio. We'd love to feature you on our podcast this week." Then another Emily. "This is Fiona from the Metropolitan Arts Foundation. Would you be interested in performing at our charity gala next month?" And another. "Emily, my name's David Park. I'm an agent with Park & Sons Talent. I saw the video. I think you have something rare." Emily sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in disbelief. She hadn't looked for any of this. She hadn't asked to be noticed. She had simply done what she loved on now. The world had noticed her. She spent the next few hours answering messages, thanking people, and trying to understand what was happening. One part of her was excited, thrilled even. The other part felt overwhelmed, nervous. It had all happened so fast. Later that day, she received a message that made her stop completely. It was from Richard Langston. The message was short. "Meet me tomorrow at 11 a.m. Bring no expectations. Just yourself." It was signed with his initials RL and included the address of his private office. The next morning, Emily stood in front of a tall glass building in Midtown Manhattan. She wore the nicest outfit she owned, a plain blouse and dark jeans. She had no idea what Richard wanted from her, but she was curious and, honestly, a little scared. She took the elevator to the top floor. The doors opened into a bright, quiet hallway. A receptionist greeted her and led her into a sleek office. With floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture, Richard stood up when she entered. He was wearing a simple black suit, no tie. He nodded politely and gestured for her to sit. "Thank you for coming," said Emily, folding her hands nervously. "You've had quite a few people reaching out to you, haven't you?" he asked. She nodded. "Good. You deserve it." "Why?" "Did you ask me here?" she asked gently. "I wanted to talk," he said, "about your future." Emily tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" Richard stood and walked to the window. "When I was your age, nobody gave me anything," he said. "I had to fight for every opportunity, and sometimes I still think that's the best way." But then, once in a while, someone comes along who deserves a chance, someone who shouldn't have to fight so hard just to survive. He turned and looked at her. You're one of those people. Emily blinked, unsure what to say. You said your mother's sick? He asked. Yes, she nodded. Lung disease. She needs care. I work to pay for her medicine, our rent. Richard nodded. And Juilliard? You left because of money? Yes. He was silent for a moment. I want to offer you something, he said at last. A scholarship. Full tuition, plus a monthly living stipend. You go back to school. Finish. Your training. Focus only on your music, Emily gasped. Wait. What? You heard me, he said calmly. No tricks, no strings. Just one condition. What is it? You don't give up again? Not for anything. You finish what you've started? You owe that to yourself. Emily couldn't speak. Her mouth opened, then closed again. I don't understand, she said softly. Why are you doing this? Richard smiled faintly. Because I believe in rare things. And you, Miss Rivera, are rare. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he replied simply. Emily nodded slowly. Her voice cracked when she finally whispered yes. They shook hands. His grip was strong and sure. Hers trembled, but not from fear this time. It was hope. When she stepped back out into the bright sunlight, the city looked different, bigger, brighter. She didn't feel small anymore. She felt like a door had opened, and behind it, her life was waiting. Emily sat quietly on the subway train, her hands resting in her lap. It was early morning, and the train rocked gently as it moved through the dark tunnels beneath the city. Around her, people sat with sleepy eyes, holding coffee cups and bags, on their way to work or school, but Emily's heart was racing. She wasn't just going to work or class, she was going to change her life. It had been 2 weeks since her meeting with Richard Langston, the day he offered her something she thought she would never have again, a second chance. Every day since then had felt like a dream. She had returned to Juilliard, the school she loved, the place that had once felt like her future before life forced her to walk away. Her professors remembered her. Some were shocked to see her back. One even cried. They had always believed in her talent, and now they were eager to help her catch up. Emily had a full schedule of classes: music theory, ear training, technique, and private lessons. It was hard work. Her fingers ached from practicing for hours. Her mind felt tired from trying to remember everything she'd forgotten. But every time she sat down at a piano, she smiled. Even when her hands trembled or she missed a note, she knew this was where she was meant to be. The scholarship Richard gave her covered her rent and her mother's medication. For the first time in years, she didn't have to choose between surviving and dreaming. She could do both. Her mother, too, had changed. She smiled more. She sat by the window now, looking out at the street, humming old songs. Sometimes Emily would play a soft piece at night, and her mother would close her eyes and listen like she was floating in a memory. It gave Emily strength. That morning, Emily was on her way to something special. Her professor had chosen her to play in a small student showcase at Juilliard. It wasn't a concert for the public, just teachers, a few donors, and a couple of invited guests. But still, it was her first performance since she came back. And even though it wasn't a big stage, it felt like the biggest moment of her life. When she arrived at the school, she walked down the familiar halls, the same ones she had once walked years ago, with a backpack full of sheet music and hope. The walls smelled of polish and old wood. The sound of pianos and violins drifted from practice rooms. Like a quiet storm of talent waiting to be heard, Emily changed into her dress for the performance, a simple black outfit that fit just right. She tied her hair back and looked in the mirror. For a moment, she didn't see the tired waitress or the scared girl who once gave up on her dream. She saw a musician, a real one. Backstage, she waited for her turn. Other students played before her beautiful pieces that filled the small auditorium with sound. The audience clapped politely. Emily clutched her sheet music and took deep breaths. Finally, her name was called. She walked onto the stage. The lights were soft and warm. The grand piano stood in the center like an old friend waiting for her return. She bowed gently and sat down. She placed her hands on the keys. The room was silent. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't need to. She closed her eyes for a moment, took one more breath, and began to play. The piece was one she had written herself, not from her old days at school, but recently. It was raw and emotional, filled with her journey, the struggle, the pain, the nights working double shifts, the sound of her mother coughing in the dark, the loneliness, the hope, and finally the joy of finding herself again. Each note told a story. People in the audience leaned forward. Some held their breath. The melody was gentle at first, then stronger, then soft again, like waves crashing, then retreating. Emily's fingers moved with grace and passion. Her face showed every emotion she had hidden for years. When the final note faded into silence, the room stayed still for a few seconds. Then came the applause, slow, then louder, rising like a tide. People stood. The professors smiled. A few had tears in their eyes. Emily stood, bowed again, and walked off stage. Her heart beating so fast she thought it might burst. Backstage, one of the teachers hugged her. Another whispered, "That was beautiful." She smiled through her tears. After the showcase, a small reception was held in the hallway. Emily sipped water and spoke politely to people who came to congratulate her. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw someone she didn't expect. Richard Langston. He stood at the back, dressed sharply in a dark coat. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were warm. He walked toward her slowly. "You came," she said. "I said I'd be watching, didn't I? Didn't expect you to come here, though. I wanted to hear you play again. I'm glad I did." "You like it?" she asked softly. Richard nodded. It was honest. "I don't hear that often." Emily smiled. "Thank you, really." He looked around the room. "They're all talking about you, your professors. Some of the donors? You've made an impression." "I didn't think I would." "Don't doubt yourself," he said. "It's not useful." She laughed a little. "I'm still getting used to all this." "You'll get used to it. Outgrow it." Where he paused, then added, "There's something else." Emily looked up. "What is it?" "A friend of mine, he runs a music center for underprivileged youth. He's looking for someone to teach piano once a week. Someone the kids can look up to. I gave him your name. Me. Teach." "Why not? I don't know if I'm ready for that." "You are," Richard said firmly. "They don't need." "Perfect. They need real. And you're that." Emily felt a lump in her throat. "I'll think about it. You should," he said. "It's more than a job. It's a way to stay grounded, to remember why you play." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I will." He turned to leave but stopped after a few steps. "Oh, and Emily, yes. Don't let anyone dim your light, not even yourself." And then he walked away. Emily stood there, feeling the words settle in her chest. She stayed at the reception a little longer. But her thoughts were already spinning with new dreams. Maybe she could teach. Maybe she could help kids like herself. With talent, but no voice. That night, back home, she told her mother everything. They sat on the bed, side by side, and Emily played the piece agains for her. Her mother listened with tears in her eyes. "You've come so far," she whispered. "I still have far to go." "Yes," her mother said. "But now you believe. You can—" Emily smiled. She did believe. For the first time in years, she truly believed. Emily stood in front of the mirror, holding a pair of earrings in her hand. Her fingers were slightly shaking. The room was quiet, except for the soft sound of the city outside. But inside Emily's heart there was a different sound, something louder, something stronger. Excitement, nervousness, hope. She took a deep breath and clipped the earrings on. Then she stepped back and looked at herself. She was wearing a long, deep blue dress, simple but elegant. Her hair was styled neatly, just enough to look formal, but still like herself. She didn't look like the waitress she had been a few months ago. She didn't look like the tired girl who used to come home after midnight shifts and cry into her pillow. No, she looked like a pianist, a real one. A woman standing at the beginning of something big. Tonight was a special night. She had been invited to perform at a high-level gala music fundraising event organized by one of the biggest arts organizations in the city. There would be donors, celebrities, musicians, and leaders from the arts world. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was part of the show, and this time, it wasn't because someone forced her to the piano. It was her choice, her invitation, her moment. Before leaving, she checked on her mother, who was resting in bed. Wrapped in a warm blanket? "You look beautiful," her mother said softly, smiling up at her. "Thank you," Emily replied, bending down to kiss her on the forehead. "I'll be back late. I'll wait up. I want to hear all about it. You always do." Her mother laughed gently and Emily smiled. Then she grabbed her small bag, slipped on her coat, and headed out the door. The car sent by the event organizers was waiting downstairs. A black town car with a polite driver who opened the door for her. With every block they passed, as they neared the gala venue, she looked out the window and saw the building glowing in golden lights. The entrance was lined with photographers. Guests in gowns and suits were stepping out of limousines. Flashing. Cameras, laughter, voices, the sound of heels clicking on the sidewalk. She took another deep breath as the car stopped. The driver opened her door, and for a moment Emily hesitated. Then she stepped out. People turned to look. Some whispered. She heard her name once, then again. "That's Emily Rivera, the girl from the party, the pianist from the video." It had been months since her performance at Richard Langston's party had gone viral, but the memory was still fresh in many minds. And now here she was again, but this time by choice, not as a waitress. Not as a surprise, but as a performer. Inside the venue, everything sparkled. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Guests mingled and laughed, their voices like music layered over the instruments. Emily was guided to a special area backstage where she met the other performers. There were violinists, cellists, singers, all professionals. All trained. All experienced at first, Emily felt small again. What if she didn't belong? What if her hands shook during her performance? What if she made a mistake? She sat in a quiet corner and closed her eyes. She thought about everything that had led. Her hair working at the cafe, Richard forcing her to play, the video going viral, the return to Juilliard, her small concert, teaching the kids once a week. Every step had been hard. But every step had also made her stronger. She whispered to herself, "You're here because you earned it. You belong." The show began. One by one, the performers went out and returned. Applause filled the air over and over. Emily waited patiently. Then, finally, the coordinator came to her. "You're next, Miss Rivera. Good luck." She stood. Her heart was pounding. But her steps were steady. The stage was large, with a beautiful black grand piano at the center. The audience was filled with people, hundreds of them, dressed in fine clothes, waiting for the next act. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight focused on her as she walked out. For a moment, there was silence. Then polite applause as the announcer said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome pianist Emily Rivera." She sat at the piano and looked out at the crowd. Somewhere in the front row, she spotted a familiar face, Richard Langston. He was watching her closely, not smiling, but not cold either, just focused. Then she turned back to the keys. Her fingers rested on them. She began to play. The piece she chose was a mix of old and new. It began with a soft melody from a well-known classical work, then shifted into her own composition. The transition was seamless, natural. Her own music carried her voice filled with emotion, filled with power. Filled with truth, the room grew quiet. People leaned forward. No one moved. No. One whispered. It was like magic had fallen over the room, and she was holding it with her hands. She closed her eyes. For a few moments, she wasn't in the gala hall. She was back in her apartment, playing for her mother. She was at Juilliard in a tiny practice room. She was back at the party, scared and trembling, with Richard pushing her forward. And she was now right, now a woman no longer afraid. When the last note faded, there was silence. Then an explosion of applause. People stood, some clapped, some whistled, some cheered. The sound filled her heart. She stood, bowed slowly, and walked off stage. Backstage, even the professional musicians. One said, "I don't know what you just did, but I felt it in my bones." Another added, "You've got something special. Don't ever stop." As the evening came to a close, Emily found Richard waiting near. The exit. "You really don't smile much, do you?" she teased him. "I do," he said, "but only when I'm proud." She looked at him. "Are you proud now?" "Yes, thank you for everything. You did it, not me. You gave me a chance. You deserved it." They stood in silence for a moment. Then he said, "You're going to go far. That's what keeps your music real." "I won't forget." He nodded once and left. Later that night, Emily returned home. She took off her heels and dress, changed into her soft pajamas. Emily smiled. "I felt amazing. I'm proud of you." "I'm proud of me too." They sat in silence for a while. Then Emily said, "Mom, I think I'm going to record an album. Original music. You should. I want to keep teaching. The kids at the center, they remind me why I love music." "Then you've already found success." That night, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about how much her life had changed. Not because of fame or money, but because she had been brave. Brave enough to sit at a piano. Believe in herself. And as she drifted off to sleep, the last thought in her mind was a simple one. This is only the beginning.